In this video, we're going to be learning about valence electrons. You are probably wondering, what are valence electrons and why are we interested in them? We are going to answer these questions in reverse order. First of all, why are valence electrons important? They're important because an atom's chemistry is mostly determined by its valence electrons. So what are valence electrons? Valence electrons have two main characteristics. Generally, they are the electrons that are, number one, farthest from the nucleus, and number two, the electrons at the highest energy level. These two characteristics go together if you remember what we learned from our study of atomic structure. For example, if you remember the shape of the s orbital, it's a sphere. Hydrogen and helium have a small sphere. Lithium and beryllium have a larger sphere at energy level 2, and that sphere, the s orbital keeps its shape, but as it goes down the chart, it gets larger and larger, and the electrons that are whirling around in it get farther and farther away from the nucleus. And remember that energy level increases as you go down the chart, and so those larger s orbitals are at a higher energy level. So now let's identify the valence electrons, because except for the elements hydrogen and helium, the valence electrons are generally a small subset of the electrons that an element will have. Please keep in mind that throughout this video we will be dealing with elements that have no net charge, which means that they will have the same number of electrons as they have protons. And we can always find the number of protons for any element because that is a very basic characteristic called the atomic number. So now we're going to put our work learning electronic configurations to good use, because the number of valence electrons falls right out of the electron configuration. And by the way, I think that's electron configuration and not electronic configuration. A minor but important point. We're going to start with bromine as our example. If we look on the chart, we're going to find that bromine has an atomic number of 35, which means that bromine has 35 protons. But because we're talking about elements that have no net charge, we can also say that bromine has 35 electrons. But to see which of these 35 electrons are bromine's valence electrons, we'll need to write out the electron configuration for bromine. So with a chart in hand, we start up there with hydrogen, and we find that the first two of bromine's electrons are going to go in the 1s orbital, 1s2. We'll pop down to 2s2, pop across to 2p6, pop down to 3s2, pop across to 3p6, pop down to 4s2, and now we can't pop across because we've got some D's in there, and we remember that they're at the third energy level, and there's going to be 10 of them because we see bromine over there in the P block, and then we're going to finish up with 4p5. So let's look at the definition of valence electrons to see where they are. They will be the electrons that are the farthest from the nucleus and at the highest energy level. What is the highest energy level that you see here? Well, the highest energy level that you see is energy level number 4. And so these electrons that are in the 4s2, the 4s orbital, and these electrons that are in the 4p orbital combine to become the valence electrons for bromine. And so we see that bromine has 2 plus 5, or 7 valence electrons. Now, why did we skip the 3d10 electrons, since they're sandwiched in between the 4s electrons and the 4p electrons? Well, we skipped them because that, although they are sandwiched in between there, and it's after you complete the 4s orbital with 2 electrons that you begin filling the first 3d orbital, it's still at the energy level 3. Its energy level is 3, and so it's at the same energy level as these electrons, which are closer to the nucleus and at a lower energy level than 4. So the highest energy level for bromine is 4. At the 4th energy level, we find 2 electrons in the s orbital and 5 in the p orbital, to make for a total of 7 valence electrons for bromine. Okay, now to recap. Valence electrons are important because they are directly related to an element's chemistry. There are 2 characteristics of valence electrons. They are the farthest from the nucleus, and they are the ones at the highest energy levels. We saw from our example that bromine had 35 electrons, but only 7 of those electrons were valence electrons.